Hello, especially for the Dirty Secrets channel.
The anticipation. Thomas clutched the small wrapped box in his pocket as the taxi pulled onto his street. Inside was the iPhone his wife Claire had been eyeing for months, sleek, powerful, and painfully expensive. But after landing this account in Seattle, he could finally afford it. 3 weeks away from home had felt like an eternity, but the thought of Claire's face lighting up made it worthwhile. The neighborhood looked exactly as he had left it, the Henderson's sprinklers creating tiny rainbows on their front lawn, Mrs. Patterson's cat watching from her windowsill, the familiar crack in the sidewalk he always stepped over. Yet something felt different. Maybe it was just the anticipation of seeing Claire again. "Just pull up here," Thomas told the driver, deciding to walk the last 50 yards. He wanted to savor this moment. As he stepped out, he noticed Mr. Reeves, his next-door neighbor, trimming his hedges. The older man's shoulders visibly tensed when their eyes met. "Thomas, back early," Mr. Reeves called out, his clippers freezing mid-cut. "Right on schedule, actually," Thomas replied with a smile, patting the gift in his pocket. "Can't wait to surprise Claire." Something flashed across Mr. Reeves' weathered face. Pity, perhaps? Or discomfort? "Thomas, maybe we should talk for a minute." The revelation. Thomas sat on Mr. Reeves' porch steps, the gift box now heavy in his hands. The old man's words hung in the air between them, impossible to unhear. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you," Mr. Reeves was saying, though his voice seemed to come from very far away. "But Martha and I thought you should know before you walked in there. The same car's been parked in your driveway most nights you've been gone. Some guy with a leather jacket. They haven't exactly been discreet." Thomas stared at the perfectly wrapped present, the silver ribbon catching the afternoon sun. He had spent an extra $20 to have a gift wrapped at the store. $20 for a box that now felt like it contained nothing but his own foolishness. "Are you sure?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Small details were clicking into place. Claire's distracted phone calls, her sudden interest in girls' nights that seemed to multiply before his business trip, the way she had almost seemed relieved when he told her he'd be gone for 3 weeks. "I am sorry, son," Mr. Reeves said, placing a calloused hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Martha baked some of her apple cobbler. Why don't you come inside for a bit? Give yourself some time to think." Thomas shook his head, rising to his feet. "Thank you, but I need to see for myself." As he walked the remaining distance to his home, each step felt like walking through quicksand. The perfectly manicured lawn, the flower boxes Claire had insisted on, all of it now seemed like props on a stage, a performance of domestic bliss that had apparently fooled only him. The confrontation. The house was quiet when Thomas entered, but he could hear the shower running upstairs. Claire's purse sat on the kitchen counter, next to a wine glass with a lipstick smudge. Next to it, a second glass, empty. He placed the wrapped iPhone on the dining table and sat down, waiting. The shower stopped. He heard humming, then footsteps. "Hello?" Claire called out, likely hearing movement downstairs. When she appeared at the bottom of the stairs in her bathrobe, her hair wrapped in a towel, her expression shifted from surprise to confusion to something Thomas had never seen before, fear mixed with guilt. "Thomas, I thought you weren't coming back until tomorrow." The pitch of her voice was too high, her smile too bright. "Surprise," he said flatly, pushing the gift box across the table toward her. "I got you something." Her eyes darted from the box to his face, then to the wine glasses on the counter that were visible from where he sat. "Thomas, I can explain." "I'd love to hear it," he interrupted, surprised by the calmness in his voice when everything inside him was screaming. "But first, where is he?" Claire's face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" "The guy with the leather jacket. The one who's been parked in our driveway most nights. The one who was probably here about," he checked his watch, 20 minutes ago, judging by the wine. "Did he leave through the back door when you heard me come in? Or is he hiding upstairs?" Tears welled in her eyes. "It's not what you think." Thomas laughed, a hollow sound that surprised even him. "Isn't that what they always say in the movies? Please, Claire, at least have the decency not to insult my intelligence." The collapse. Thomas didn't remember driving to the hotel. He didn't remember checking in, or riding the elevator, or finding his room. Yet here he was, staring at the ceiling from a stiff mattress, the room's air conditioner humming too loudly. His phone buzzed for the 17th time. Claire. He couldn't bring himself to read her messages or listen to her voicemails. Each one was just another lie, another excuse, another attempt to minimize what she had done. The iPhone he had bought her sat on the nightstand, still wrapped. He had grabbed it before leaving the house, though he couldn't say why. Maybe as a reminder of his own blindness. Or maybe because, despite everything, some foolish part of him had spent 3 weeks picking it out with care, and he couldn't bear to leave it behind. His mind replayed their confrontation on endless loop. Her tearful confession, not just one man, but 2 different ones over the past year. Her insistence that she still loved Thomas, that she had just been lonely, that his constant business trips had left her feeling abandoned. "So this is my fault?" he had asked incredulously. "No, that's not what I am saying," she had backpedaled. "But you never hear, Thomas. Weeks at a time. What did you expect?" The question haunted him now. What had he expected? Loyalty? Basic respect? The honoring of vows they had made to each other? He had been working those long hours, taking those business trips, to give her the life she wanted. The house in the good neighborhood. The expensive furniture. And yes, the iPhone she had been hinting about for months. Thomas reached for the wrapped box and hurled it against the wall. It hit with a satisfying crack, then fell to the carpet. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was that, in those first moments after Mr. Reeves told him, Thomas's immediate thought had been, "What did I do wrong?" The mirror. The hotel's bathroom mirror showed a man Thomas barely recognized. 3 days of stubble, bloodshot eyes, skin pale from too little sleep and too much whiskey from the minibar. "What did you do wrong?" he asked his reflection, echoing the question that had been tormenting him. "You trusted someone who didn't deserve it. You worked yourself to exhaustion for someone who didn't appreciate it. You loved someone who didn't love you back the same way." He splashed cold water on his face. His boss had been understanding when Thomas called to request a week off, citing a family emergency. If only he knew. Thomas's phone buzzed again. Not Claire this time, but his friend Marcus. "Heard what happened," the text read. "Claire's telling everyone you overreacted and abandoned her. Need me to set the record straight? Or better yet, need me to punch someone?" Thomas almost smiled. Marcus had never liked Claire, had warned Thomas years ago that something felt off about her. Thomas had dismissed it as typical best friend protectiveness. "No punching necessary," Thomas typed back. "But could use a friend right now." Within the hour, Marcus was at his hotel room door with takeout food and a sympathetic ear. As Thomas recounted everything, Marcus listened without interruption. "You know what's crazy?" Thomas said, picking at his cold noodles. "Part of me still wonders if I could have prevented this. If I had been home more, if I had been more attentive, if I had somehow been better." Marcus set down his food. "That's what they do, man. People like Claire, they make you believe their choices are your responsibility somehow. But let me ask you something. Did you ever cheat on her when you were away on those trips?" "Of course not. Even though you were lonely too? Even though you were in hotel rooms like this one, in cities where no one knew you?" Thomas looked up. "That thought never even crossed my mind." "Exactly," Marcus said. "Because that's not who you are. And her choices aren't a reflection of your worth. They're a reflection of hers." The flashbacks. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by dreams that were really memories, now viewed through a different lens. Thomas remembered Claire's sudden insistence, 2 years into their marriage, that they needed a bigger house, one in a neighborhood that stretched their budget to the breaking point. "We can make it work," she had said. "You just need to take on more clients." He remembered the fights that started when he couldn't afford the vacation she wanted, and how they mysteriously resolved when he agreed to work weekends to pay for it. He remembered coming home exhausted from a 14-hour day to find Claire irritated that he hadn't picked up the dry cleaning on his way home. "You never think about what I need," she had snapped. Most painfully, he remembered her reaction when his mother was diagnosed with cancer last year. He had wanted to reduce his workload to spend more time with her during treatment. We can't afford for you to work less right now, Claire had argued. Your sister can help more. She lives closer anyway. His mother had died 3 months later. Thomas had seen her only twice during her illness. He sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake, anger replacing the dull ache of betrayal. How had he not seen it? The constant demands, the shifting goalposts, the subtle ways she had isolated him from friends and family who didn't understand their lifestyle. Claire hadn't just betrayed him with other men. She had betrayed the foundation of what their partnership was supposed to be: mutual support, compassion, genuine care for each other's well-being. For the first time since leaving home, Thomas felt something other than pain. He felt clarity. The assessment, the coffee shop, was neutral territory, suggested by the marriage counselor Claire had insisted they see. Thomas had agreed, more out of curiosity than hope. He wanted to understand, not just Claire's betrayal, but his own blindness to the dynamics of their relationship. Claire looked immaculate as always, not a hair out of place, designer sunglasses perched on top of her head. The contrast with his own disheveled appearance was stark. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she began, stirring her latte. And I realize I made some terrible mistakes. But I still believe we can work through this, Thomas. 7 years of marriage has to count for something. Thomas watched her carefully. A week ago, these words might have given him hope. Now, they triggered a different response. I've been thinking too, he said. About why I was so willing to take on the blame for your actions. About why my first instinct was to question what I did wrong, rather than hold you accountable for the choices you made. Claire's expression softened, likely mistaking his words for forgiveness. That's very mature of you, to look at your own. I am not finished, Thomas interrupted gently. I realized something. Throughout our marriage, whenever there was a problem, somehow it became my responsibility to fix it. If we couldn't afford something you wanted, I needed to work more. If you were unhappy, I needed to change. If you felt neglected, I needed to rearrange my priorities. He took a sip of his coffee. But when my mother was dying and I needed support, where was the same consideration? When I was exhausted from working 60-hour weeks, where was your concern for my well-being? Claire's face tightened. That's not fair. I supported you in my own way. Did you? Because I can't remember a single instance where you put my needs before your wants. So this is all my fault? I am the villain here? Her voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. Thomas shook his head. No, the affair was your choice. But the imbalance in our relationship? That was on both of us. I allowed it. I participated in it. And that's what I need to understand better. As he spoke the words, Thomas realized something else. This conversation wasn't really about salvaging their marriage. It was about reclaiming his sense of self. The reckoning. The house felt different when Thomas returned to collect some clothes and personal items. Claire was out, at her sister's, according to the note she had left. Part of him was relieved to avoid another confrontation. He moved through the rooms with new eyes. The expensive furniture that had required so many overtime hours. The kitchen renovation that had added months to his grueling schedule. The vacation photos on the wall, moments that had been happy, yes, but always tinged with the stress of knowing how much debt they represented. In their home office, Thomas found himself opening their financial records. Credit card statements, bank accounts, mortgage documents. For the first time, he looked at the complete picture rather than just focusing on making enough to cover the next payment. The pattern was undeniable. Year after year, their lifestyle had expanded to consume every raise, every bonus, every bit of additional income he generated. And the bulk of these expenses, designer clothing, spa memberships, the luxury car Claire insisted she needed, benefited primarily one person in the household. Thomas's phone buzzed with a text from the marriage counselor, confirming their first official appointment tomorrow. He started to type a response, then stopped. What was he trying to save, exactly? Not the person he had believed Claire to be, that person had never existed. Not the marriage he thought they had, that had been an illusion. Perhaps what he was really trying to preserve was the investment he had made, the years, the sacrifices, the version of himself he had whittled away to meet impossible expectations. Thomas deleted the draft message and began a new one. I need to cancel tomorrow's appointment. I want to be continuing with counseling at this time. As he pressed send, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The path forward wasn't about fixing this marriage. It was about reclaiming himself. The awakening. 2 weeks in Marcus's spare bedroom had given Thomas space to think. Each day brought more clarity, more perspective, and strangely, more peace. He had filed for divorce, a decision that sent Claire into a panic. The tearful phone calls had turned to angry accusations, then to bargaining, and finally to a calculated appeal to their history together. "You throwing away 7 years like they meant nothing," she had said during their last conversation. "No," Thomas had replied. "I am acknowledging that those 7 years taught me something valuable about what I don't want in a relationship." Now, sitting in a coffee shop with his laptop, Thomas was working on something that had nothing to do with making more money or meeting Claire's expectations. He was redesigning his life. A spreadsheet showed his new budget, modest but sufficient. Another document outlined a business plan for the consulting firm he had always wanted to start but had never had the courage to pursue. A third contained the beginnings of a letter to his late mother, an exercise suggested by the therapist he was now seeing on his own. "Mind if I join you?" a voice asked. Thomas looked up to see Eliza, an old friend from college he had run into last week. They had fallen out of touch over the years. Claire had found her too opinionated. "Please," Thomas said, gesturing to the empty chair. As they talked, Thomas realized how much he had missed this conversation that didn't feel like walking through a minefield, laughter that wasn't tinged with tension, ideas exchanged without judgment. "You seem different," Eliza observed. "More present, somehow." Thomas considered this. "I am different. For a long time, I was trying to be who someone else needed me to be. I am still figuring out who I actually am." "Well," Eliza said with a smile, "I like this version of you." For the first time in weeks, Thomas felt something like happiness, not because someone was validating him, but because he was starting to validate himself. The confrontation redux. The mediation session was Claire's last chance to negotiate a more favorable divorce settlement. Thomas had expected her to bring her usual arsenal: tears, accusations, manipulations that had worked so effectively in the past. What he hadn't expected was for her to bring the iPhone. "You never even let me open it," she said, placing the now battered gift box on the table between them. "Don't you want to know if I would have liked it?" Thomas looked at the box, remembering how proudly he had carried it home, how certain he had been that this token of his hard work and thoughtfulness would make Claire happy. "That's not why I bought it for you," he said quietly. "What?" "I didn't buy it to find out if you would like it. I already knew you would. I bought it because I thought making you happy would make me feel worthy." He met her gaze steadily. "But I understand now that my worth isn't determined by your approval." Claire's carefully composed expression faltered. For a brief moment, Thomas glimpsed something real beneath the performance. Perhaps confusion, perhaps respect, perhaps the realization that the man sitting across from her was no longer the one she could control. "Keep it," Thomas said, pushing the box back toward her. "Consider it payment for a valuable life lesson." The mediator glanced between them, clearly sensing the shift in dynamics. "Shall we proceed with the terms as previously discussed?" Thomas nodded, feeling no triumph, no vindication, just confirmation that he was finally on the right path. The departure. 6 months after that rainy afternoon when Mr. Reeves had stopped him on the sidewalk, Thomas stood in the driveway of what had once been his and Claire's home. The sold sign swayed gently in the breeze. The divorce was finalized. The house had sold quickly, the proceeds split according to their agreement. Claire had moved to Chicago for a fresh start, according to mutual friends. Thomas wished her well, and meant it. Mr. and Mrs. Reeves emerged from their house, coming to say goodbye. "We miss having you next door," Mrs. Reeves said, pressing a container of cookies into his hands. "Though I can't say the same for, well, never mind that now." Mr. Reeves shook Thomas's hand firmly. "Where are you headed next?" Thomas smiled. "Renting a small place downtown for now. My consulting business is taking off, so I want to be closer to my clients. And I am taking some time to visit my sister and my nieces, long overdue." What he didn't say was that he was also making room in his life for new possibilities. Eliza had become more than just a reconnected friend, though they were taking things slowly. More importantly, he was rediscovering parts of himself that had been dormant for too long: his love of photography, his interest in local politics, his desire to mentor young professionals in his field. "Well, you always have friends here," Mr. Reeves said. "Don't be a stranger." As Thomas drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror at the house growing smaller behind him. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely. Betrayal of that magnitude leaves scars. But it no longer defined him. The gift he had carried home that day wasn't the one in the wrapped box. It was the painful but necessary awakening to his own value, independent of anyone else's validation. It was the recognition that he deserved reciprocity, respect, and genuine partnership. Thomas turned on the radio and rolled down the windows, letting the spring air fill the car. The road ahead was unmarked, unplanned, and for the first time in years, that felt like freedom.
Thank you for watching. If you liked the story, like, subscribe to the channel and share with your friends. Thank you.